The autumn sun cast long shadows across the town square as Pastor David Thompson arranged his modest wooden stand. Every Sunday afternoon for the past 5 years, he'd been setting up in this exact spot, sharing messages of hope with anyone willing to listen. The small Midwestern town had grown accustomed to his gentle presence, and many locals would stop by just to exchange a few kind words. This particular Sunday seemed no different from any other. The crisp October air carried the scent of fallen leaves and nearby coffee shops, while weekend shoppers strolled past with their bags and children. Pastor David smoothed down his well-worn blue sweater and placed his worn Bible on the stand, preparing for another afternoon of peaceful ministry. He had just begun speaking to a small gathering of interested listeners when an unfamiliar police cruiser pulled up to the curb. The officer who stepped out was not one of the usual faces David had come to know over the years. This man was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with a rigid posture that seemed to broadcast authority with every step. "Sir, you'll need to pack up and move along," the officer announced, his voice carrying across the square with unnecessary force. "We've received complaints about unauthorized solicitation." David blinked in surprise, his hand still resting on his Bible. "Officer, I respectfully disagree. I have all the necessary permits, and I've been sharing the gospel here for years without any issues." The small crowd that had gathered began to shift uncomfortably, some pulling out their phones to record what was unfolding. The officer's presence seemed to grow more imposing as he stepped closer to the wooden stand. "I don't care how long you've been here," the officer retorted, his hand resting deliberately on his belt. "The rules are changing. Either pack up now, or we'll have to do this the hard way." An elderly woman from the crowd stepped forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Officer, this man has been a blessing to our community. He helped my grandson through a very difficult time last year." The officer barely spared her a glance. "Ma'am, please step back. This is a police matter." David maintained his calm demeanor, though his heart was racing. He'd faced opposition before, but something about this officer's attitude suggested a deeper issue at play. "Officer," he began gently, "I can show you my permits right now. They're valid through the end of the year. Perhaps we could discuss this civilly?" The officer's jaw tightened. "You have exactly 3 minutes to pack up, or you're facing arrest for obstruction." By now, more townspeople had gathered, many of them regular passers-by who had come to know David over the years. A local shop owner emerged from his store, concern etched on his face. The tension in the air was palpable. David slowly reached into his messenger bag, maintaining eye contact with the officer. "Sir, I understand you're doing your job, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding. These are my permits, fully approved by the city council." As he withdrew the documents, a photograph fluttered to the ground. The officer's eyes followed it, and something in his expression shifted ever so slightly. The photo showed David surrounded by a group of smiling children at the local children's hospital, where he volunteered every Wednesday. "That was from last Christmas," David explained softly, noticing the officer's gaze. "We organized a toy drive for the kids in the oncology ward. Your department actually helped with the distribution, though I don't recall seeing you there." The officer bent down to pick up the photo, and for a moment, his stern facade cracked. David noticed his name tag for the first time, Officer Robert Chen. As Officer Chen studied the photograph, David saw something familiar in his eyes, a flash of pain, quickly masked. "My sister," Officer Chen said quietly, almost to himself. "She was in that ward last year." The revelation hung in the air between them. David's expression softened with understanding. "Katie Chen? The young woman who loved to paint?" Officer Chen's head snapped up, surprise replacing his previously hostile demeanor. "You knew her?" Every Wednesday, she'd teach the younger children how to paint while receiving her treatments. She had such a gentle spirit, such patience with them. The kids called her their art angel. The change in Officer Chen was remarkable. His shoulders slumped slightly, the aggressive posture melting away. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the officer's professional mask crumbled, revealing the pain he'd been carrying. "She talked about you," Officer Chen admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "In her final weeks, she mentioned a kind preacher who would pray with her and the other patients." I never made the connection. David stepped out from behind his stand, genuine compassion in his eyes. Katie was a remarkable young woman. She touched so many lives in the short time she was with us. Not a Wednesday goes by that the children don't mention their art angel. Officer Chen cleared his throat, clearly struggling with his emotions. The gathered crowd began to disperse discreetly, sensing the private nature of the moment. A few lingered nearby, still recording, but maintaining a respectful distance. "I've been angry," Officer Chen confessed, still holding the photograph. "Since she passed. I've been taking it out on everyone. When I got the call about a preacher in the square, I didn't even check the permits. I just wanted to feel in control of something," David finished gently. "I understand. Grief can make us do things we wouldn't normally do. Katie knew that too. She used to tell me that her paintings helped her control her fears about her illness." Officer Chen wiped his eyes quickly, attempting to regain his professional composure. But the damage to his tough exterior was done. The transformation from aggressive enforcer to grieving brother had taken less than 8 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. "I have some of her paintings," David mentioned softly. "The ones she did with the children. We display them in the hospital ward sometimes. Would you like to see them? I'm sure the kids would love to meet Katie's brother." For the first time, a genuine smile crossed Officer Chen's face. "I'd like that. And I'm sorry about all this. I'll make sure the department knows your permits are in order." As Officer Chen turned to leave, he paused. "You know, Katie always said everything happens for a reason. Maybe she had a point." David watched as the officer walked back to his cruiser, his steps lighter than when he'd arrived. The remaining onlookers began to approach, amazed by what they'd witnessed, but David's thoughts were with Katie and her brother. Sometimes, he reflected, the most powerful ministry happened without a single verse being quoted. The autumn sun continued its descent, casting a warm glow over the town square. David returned to his wooden stand, picked up his Bible, and smiled. Today's sermon had written itself, and its message was clear: behind every act of hostility, there might be a heart in pain, waiting for understanding and healing. The following Wednesday arrived with a mix of anticipation and uncertainty. Pastor David stood in the children's hospital ward, carefully arranging Katie's paintings on the display board. Each colorful piece told a story, not just of artistic talent, but of hope, resilience, and the pure joy of creation. The children were especially excited today, having heard that their beloved art angel's brother would be visiting. "Is he really coming?" asked 10-year-old Amy, her green eyes bright despite the obvious fatigue from her recent treatment. She sat in her wheelchair, clutching her favorite paintbrush, a gift from Katie months ago. "He promised he would," David replied, adjusting a particularly vibrant painting of a rainbow-colored butterfly that Katie had helped Amy create. The memory of Sunday's encounter in the town square still felt surreal, like a divine orchestration that only revealed its purpose after the fact. At precisely 2 o'clock, Officer Chen appeared in the doorway, still in his uniform but somehow looking less imposing than he had in the square. He carried a large cardboard box, and his eyes immediately went to the paintings on display. For a moment, he stood frozen, seeing his sister's work through new eyes. "Officer Chen." David welcomed him warmly. "Or would you prefer Robert here?" "Rob is fine," he answered softly, his gaze still fixed on the artwork. I brought something. Found it in Katie's apartment when we were." He paused, collecting himself. "It's her art supplies. Thought maybe the kids could use them." The children watched with curiosity as Rob set the box down. Amy wheeled herself forward, breaking the ice in the way that only children can. "Did Katie teach you to paint too?" A small smile crossed Rob's face. "She tried. I was horrible at it. But she never gave up on me." That was Katie, she never gave up on anyone. As Rob began unpacking the art supplies, more children gathered around. Some were in wheelchairs, others trailing 4 poles, but all were drawn to this connection to their art angel. David watched as Rob's initial awkwardness melted away, replaced by genuine engagement with the young patients. This was her favorite brush, Rob explained, holding up a well-worn paintbrush with a purple handle. She used to say that every stroke was a prayer, every color a different kind of hope. "I remember that," piped up 12-year-old Thomas from his bed. "She let me use it once when I was really scared before surgery. Said it was magic, that anyone who held it would be brave." Rob's eyes misted over. "That sounds like Katie." He looked around the room, taking in the children's artwork adorning the walls, many pieces created under his sister's guidance. "I had no idea. I mean, I knew she volunteered here, but I didn't understand the impact she had," David suggested gently. "Sometimes we don't see the full picture until we step back. Katie understood that better than most. She always said her illness taught her to look for beauty in unexpected places." As the afternoon progressed, Rob found himself sitting with the children, attempting to paint under their enthusiastic guidance. His police uniform became spotted with paint, but he didn't seem to mind. The children delighted in teaching him, just as his sister had once taught them. "You're holding it wrong." Amy giggled, demonstrating the proper brush technique. "Katie always said to hold it like you're holding a butterfly, gentle but sure." Rob's attempts at painting were endearingly clumsy, but his willingness to try, to be vulnerable in front of these children, spoke volumes. David noticed how the officer's stern demeanor had completely disappeared, replaced by something softer, more authentic. "You know," Rob said during a quiet moment, watching the children paint, "I've been so angry since Katie passed. Threw myself into work, became harder, more rigid. Started seeing threats everywhere instead of opportunities to help. Sunday in the square, that wasn't really about permits or regulations." David nodded understanding. "Grief changes us. But Katie's legacy isn't in anger or control, it's right here, in every smile, every brush stroke, every moment of joy these children experienced despite their challenges." A nurse entered the ward, signaling the end of visiting hours. As Rob helped clean up the art supplies, Amy presented him with her painting, a somewhat wobbly but heartfelt attempt at a police badge surrounded by butterflies. "Katie always said butterflies are like hope with wings," Amy explained seriously. "And police officers are like hope with badges. So I put them together." Rob carefully took the painting, treating it as if it were a priceless masterpiece. In many ways, it was. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Would it be okay if I came back sometime?" The children's enthusiastic response brought the first real smile David had seen on Rob's face. As they walked together toward the exit, Rob stopped by Katie's butterfly painting. "I've been doing it all wrong," he admitted. "Trying to honor her memory by being tough, uncompromising. But Katie was all about transformation, like her butterflies. She took scary things like hospitals and treatments and turned them into opportunities for beauty and connection." David placed a supportive hand on Rob's shoulder. "It's never too late to change our approach." Katie knew that every ending could also be a beginning. Rob looked down at his paint-stained uniform and chuckled. "My sergeant's going to have questions about this." "Tell him you were upholding your sister's law, the law of kindness," David suggested. "Sometimes that's the most powerful force for change in our communities." As they parted ways, Rob turned back one last time. "Pastor David? About Sunday, thank you. For not meeting my anger with anger. For seeing past the uniform to the pain. I think Katie would have liked that. David watched as Rob walked down the hospital corridor, Amy's painting held carefully in his hands. The officer's posture was different now, less rigid, more open. Sometimes, David reflected, the greatest transformations didn't need dramatic confrontations or lengthy sermons. Sometimes they just needed a gentle reminder of love's enduring impact, and the courage to let that love reshape us, one brush stroke at a time. The story of Officer Chen's transformation spread through the small town like ripples in a pond. It wasn't just the viral videos from that Sunday in the square, but the visible changes in the officer himself that caught people's attention. The stern, unyielding law enforcer had been replaced by someone more approachable, more human. 2 weeks after the hospital visit, Pastor David was setting up his stand as usual when he noticed something unusual. Officer Chen's police cruiser was already parked nearby, but instead of looking intimidating, Rob was helping an elderly woman with her groceries, chatting and smiling as he carried her bags. "He's different now," commented Mrs. Rodriguez, the owner of the local bakery, as she brought David his usual Sunday coffee. "Last week, he helped my grandson when his bike chain broke. Spent 20 minutes fixing it and teaching him basic maintenance." Who would have thought? David watched as Rob returned to his cruiser, only to be approached by a group of teenagers. Instead of the usual tension such encounters might bring, there was an easy rapport. One of the teens was showing Rob something on his phone, probably artwork, given Rob's enthusiastic response. "The kids at the hospital can't stop talking about him," Mrs. Rodriguez continued, adjusting her apron. "My niece works there as a nurse. Says he visits twice a week now, during his lunch breaks. Brings art supplies and snacks. They call him the Art Angel's Guardian." David smiled at the nickname, knowing how much it would mean to Rob. The officer had taken his sister's legacy and transformed it into something beautiful, not just preserving her memory, but building upon it in his own unique way. As the afternoon crowd began to gather for David's regular sermon, Rob approached the stand. He was carrying something covered in cloth. "Pastor David, do you have a moment? There's something I'd like to share with everyone, if that's okay." David gestured welcomingly to the space beside his stand. The crowd, many of whom had witnessed the confrontation 2 weeks ago, watched with interest as Rob carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing a striking painting. "I've been practicing," Rob explained, his voice carrying across the square. "The kids have been teaching me. This is what I see now, when I look at our town." The painting showed the town square, but not as it physically appeared. Instead, it was a tapestry of interconnected scenes: the children's hospital ward, the police station, the local shops, the wooden preaching stand, all linked by delicate butterflies in flight. "It's not very good," Rob admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Katie could have done it so much better. But she always said art isn't about perfection, it's about showing others how you see the world." The crowd murmured appreciatively, several people taking photos of the painting and its unlikely artist. A young boy tugged at Rob's uniform sleeve. "Are you really a police officer?" "My dad says police officers don't paint." Rob knelt down to the boy's level. "Your dad's mostly right, most of us don't. But my sister taught me that sometimes the best way to protect and serve is to see the world through other people's eyes. Sometimes that means trying new things, even if we're not very good at them at first." David watched as more people gathered, drawn not just by his usual sermon but by this unexpected display of vulnerability and growth from a local officer. He noticed how Rob's colleagues drove by, offering supportive waves instead of the concerned glances they'd shown in the early days of his transformation. "The thing is," Rob continued, addressing the growing crowd, 2 weeks ago, I stood in this exact spot, full of anger and pain, thinking I was doing my job by shutting down something I didn't understand. But God had other plans." He glanced at David with a grateful smile. Sometimes the people we try to silence are the ones we most need to hear. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. David recognized her as one of the hospital volunteers. "Officer Chen, the children wanted you to have this." She handed him a large card, decorated with fingerprint butterflies and wobbly signatures. "They made it yesterday. They say you're helping them be brave, just like Katie did." Rob took the card with trembling hands, and for a moment, David saw the same raw emotion that had broken through during their first encounter. But this time, there was no attempt to hide it, no rush to maintain a tough exterior. "You know what Katie would say about all this?" Rob asked, looking around at the gathered faces. "She'd say that sometimes our biggest challenges are actually doors to our greatest blessings. I didn't understand that 2 weeks ago. I was so focused on enforcing the law that I forgot about enforcing compassion." David stepped forward, placing a hand on Rob's shoulder. "Your sister once told me that every person is like a painting in progress. Sometimes we don't see the full picture until someone helps us step back and look with fresh eyes." The Sunday afternoon had transformed into something more than a sermon. It had become a testimony to the power of transformation, of grief turned to purpose, of anger reshaped into understanding. As Rob hung his painting on the side of David's stand, the butterflies seemed to shimmer in the autumn sunlight. "I have a confession to make," Rob said quietly to David as the crowd began to disperse. "I've been listening to your sermons these past 2 weeks. Not officially, just sitting in my cruiser, keeping an eye on things. Everything you say about hope and redemption, it hits different now." David smiled, remembering Katie's words about everything happening for a reason. "You know, Rob, sometimes the best sermons aren't the ones we preach, they're the ones we live. Your journey these past weeks has touched more lives than any words I could share." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the square, Rob helped David pack up his stand. The painting would stay, becoming a permanent part of the Sunday gatherings, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes begin with a moment of confrontation transformed by understanding. "See you Wednesday?" David asked, knowing the children would be expecting their art angel's guardian. Rob nodded, touching the pocket where he'd carefully tucked away the children's card. "Wouldn't miss it. Katie always said that healing happens in community. Took me a while to understand what she meant, but I think I'm starting to get it now." The autumn breeze carried the scent of Mrs. Rodriguez's fresh bread and the sound of evening church bells. In the distance, a group of teenagers waved goodbye to Officer Chen, their former adversary turned unexpected ally. The town square had witnessed many sermons over the years, but perhaps none as powerful as the ongoing story of a grieving brother's transformation from enforcer to artist, from antagonist to advocate, from pain to purpose. 1 month after the transformative encounter in the town square, autumn had fully embraced the small town. The police department's monthly community meeting was unusually crowded, with citizens spilling out of the modest conference room into the hallway. At the front of the room, Chief Patterson stood beside Officer Rob Chen, both men facing an attentive audience. "As many of you know," the chief began, his weathered face breaking into a proud smile, "Officer Chen has proposed something unprecedented for our department. Today, we're officially launching the Art Angel Initiative, a community outreach program combining law enforcement with creative expression." Rob stepped forward, no longer the rigid officer who had confronted Pastor David that fateful Sunday. His uniform was as crisp as ever, but his presence now carried a different kind of authority, one born of compassion rather than control. "My sister Katie believed that art could bridge any gap," Rob explained, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "She proved it every Wednesday at the Children's Hospital. Now, we have a chance to prove it in our community policing." The presentation screen behind him showed photographs of the program's pilot project, police officers sitting with at-risk youth, painting together while engaging in open dialogue. Another image showed a mural in progress on the side of the police station, a collaborative effort between local teenagers and law enforcement. "The results have been remarkable," Chief Patterson continued. In just 3 weeks of the pilot program, we've seen a 40% increase in youth engagement with our department. More importantly, we're building real relationships, real understanding. In the audience, Pastor David watched with quiet satisfaction. Beside him sat Amy from the Children's Hospital, now strong enough to attend outpatient treatment. She clutched her ever-present sketchbook, filled with new drawings inspired by her sessions with Rob. A hand raised in the audience. Officer Chen, how do you respond to critics who say this program is too soft for law enforcement? Rob smiled, reaching into his pocket to pull out a worn photograph, the same one that had fallen from David's bag that Sunday. Law enforcement isn't just about being tough. It's about building trust, understanding our community's needs, and finding innovative ways to serve. Sometimes that means stepping out of our comfort zones. He gestured to a display of artwork along the wall, pieces created during the pilot program. Each of these tells a story. That painting there? Created by a teenage boy who used to run away whenever he saw a police car. Now he stops by the station twice a week to work on art projects and talk about his future plans for college. The chief stepped forward again. We've already received inquiries from 3 neighboring departments about implementing similar programs. Officer Chen will be heading up training sessions to share what we've learned. After the presentation, as people mingled and examined the artwork, Amy tugged at Rob's sleeve. Can I show them my new painting? The one about the butterfly police? Rob's face lit up. Of course. Chief Patterson, this is Amy, one of our resident artists from the hospital. She's been helping us design the program logo. Amy proudly held up her sketchbook, showing a beautifully rendered design combining a police badge with delicate butterfly wings. The room fell silent as she explained her concept. See, the badge represents protection, and the butterfly shows transformation, she said with the wisdom that often comes to children who have faced serious illness. Officer Rob taught me that police officers help people transform too, from scared to brave, from lost to found. David watched as hardened veterans of the force wiped discreet tears from their eyes. The chief himself seemed moved beyond words. This was more than a community outreach program, it was a revolution in blue, sparked by a moment of divine intervention in the town square. Later that evening, Rob and David sat in the hospital cafeteria, sharing coffee after their regular Wednesday session with the children. The cafeteria staff had started keeping the coffee pot fresh, knowing they'd come by after art therapy. Sometimes I wonder what Katie would think of all this, Rob mused, turning his coffee cup in his hands. Me, teaching art? Starting a police outreach program based on painting? I think she'd say it's exactly what she hoped for, David replied. Not the specific program, perhaps, but the way you've taken her spirit of connection and made it your own. Rob nodded, pulling out his phone to show David a text message. The State Police Academy wants me to give a presentation about the Art Angel initiative. They're interested in incorporating creative expression into their training curriculum. Can you imagine? Future officers learning about community building through art? David smiled, remembering the angry officer from that Sunday morning. God works in mysterious ways. Your sister's legacy keeps growing, touching lives in ways none of us could have predicted. You know what's really amazing? Rob said, his voice thoughtful. Last week, I responded to a call about a disturbance. Found a young man, clearly distressed, spray painting an abandoned wall. Instead of immediately moving to arrest him, I asked about his artwork. Turned out he was grieving his mother's death, using art to process his pain, just like I've been doing. What happened? Instead of taking him in, I introduced him to our program. He's now teaching other kids about responsible street art. We're even planning a sanctioned graffiti wall where young artists can express themselves legally and safely. The hospital intercom crackled with routine announcements as they sat in comfortable silence. Through the cafeteria windows, they could see the children's ward where Katie had once taught, where her brother now continued her work in his own way. "The funny thing is," Rob said finally, "I always thought being a good officer meant maintaining control, enforcing boundaries. But Katie's way, your way, of breaking down walls and building bridges? It's actually making me a better officer. The community trusts us more. They see us as partners in healing, not just enforcers of law." David thought about the upcoming Sunday service, where Rob's painting had become a permanent fixture. "Your sister once told me that every artist needs to find their own style. You've done that, Rob. You've taken her passion for healing through art and combined it with your calling to protect and serve. That's a masterpiece in itself." As they prepared to leave, a night nurse stopped them. "Officer Chen, the kids in the ward wanted you to know they've finished their part of the police station mural design. They're so excited to show you tomorrow." Rob's face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that would have seemed impossible on that confrontational Sunday morning. "Tell them I can't wait to see it. And remind them, brave strokes, gentle heart." Walking through the quiet hospital corridors, David reflected on how one moment of divine intervention had sparked a chain reaction of transformation. The angry officer had become a bridge builder, the confrontation had become a connection, and Katie's legacy had evolved into something even more beautiful than before. "You know," Rob said as they reached the parking lot, "I still have to enforce the law. But now I understand that sometimes the most important laws are the ones written on people's hearts, laws of kindness, understanding, and hope. Katie taught me that. You helped me remember it." Winter had settled over the town, bringing with it a blanket of pristine snow and the promise of the holiday season. The children's hospital ward buzzed with excitement as volunteers hung decorations, their breath fogging the windows that looked out over the white-covered landscape. Among them, Officer Rob Chen balanced precariously on a ladder, helping to string lights while wearing his full police uniform. A bit to the left, Amy directed from her wheelchair, now decorated with twinkling lights of its own. Katie always said the lights should dance like stars. The ward had been transformed not just by the seasonal decorations, but by the countless artworks that now covered nearly every available surface. The Art Angel initiative had spread far beyond its initial scope, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. Pastor David entered the ward carrying a large box of art supplies, donated by local businesses that had caught wind of the program's success. The sight that greeted him warmed his heart despite the December chill, police officers and children working side by side on holiday crafts, barriers of fear and mistrust dissolved by shared creativity. "Pastor David," Rob called out, carefully descending the ladder. "Wait until you see what the kids have planned for the Christmas art show." "Should we tell him?" he asked the children, who responded with enthusiastic nods. Amy wheeled forward, proudly holding up a poster. "We're calling it Blue Christmas, but not the sad kind," she explained. "It's about how the police officers have become part of our hospital family. Look, we even designed special ornaments." The poster showed delicate glass ornaments painted with butterflies wearing tiny police badges. Below the image was a quote, "Where hope takes flight, the Art Angel Initiative Christmas Showcase." "The mayor's coming," Rob added, his eyes shining with pride. "And 3 other police departments are sending representatives. They want to see how we've integrated art therapy into community policing." David set down the box of supplies and took in the scene before him. In one corner, a tough-looking veteran officer was learning to make paper snowflakes from a giggling 7-year-old. At a nearby table, another officer helped children paint ornaments, his badge catching the winter sunlight streaming through the windows. "Remember that first Sunday?" Rob asked quietly, standing beside David. "I was so lost in my grief, so angry at the world. Now look at this." He gestured to a wall where photographs told the story of the Art Angel Initiative's growth, newspaper clippings, candid shots of officers and children creating together, and in the center, Katie's original butterfly painting. "Your sister would be proud," David replied, watching as Amy taught a rookie officer the proper way to hold a paintbrush. "But I think she'd be even prouder of how you've taken her vision and expanded it." A nurse approached them, holding a tablet. "Officer Chen, you might want to see this." The video from last week's community art class just went viral. The video showed Rob and several other officers hosting an evening art class at the community center. Local teenagers, many of whom had previously been at odds with law enforcement, were learning to express their struggles through painting. The comments section overflowed with messages of hope and support from around the country. "We've received inquiries from police departments in 12 states, Rob explained, his voice filled with quiet amazement. "They want to know how art has helped us reduce juvenile incidents by 60% in just 3 months. But it's not just about the statistics, it's about the relationships we're building." As if to prove his point, a young teenager entered the ward, carrying a canvas under his arm. David recognized him as Tyler, a former troublemaker who had been caught vandalizing the police station 6 months ago. Now he was one of the program's most dedicated volunteers. "Officer Chen," Tyler called out, "I finished the piece for the showcase. Want to see?" Rob moved to examine the canvas, and David watched as officer and former delinquent discussed brush techniques and color choices like old friends. The painting showed a night scene of the town, but instead of stars in the sky, there were butterflies made of badge-shaped constellations. "This is going to be the centerpiece," Rob announced, causing Tyler to blush with pride. "It perfectly captures what we're trying to achieve, bringing light to dark places, hope to difficult situations." The afternoon progressed with preparations for the upcoming showcase. Children and officers worked together, their shared purpose bridging gaps that had once seemed insurmountable. David noticed how naturally Rob moved between his roles: officer, artist, mentor, friend, each identity enriching the others. "You know what Katie used to say about butterflies?" Rob asked as he helped a young patient mix colors. "She said they remind us that change isn't just possible, it's natural. Every butterfly starts as something else entirely." A small commotion at the door drew their attention. Chief Patterson had arrived with several city council members, coming to preview the showcase preparations. The children proudly showed off their creations, explaining the symbolism behind each piece with the confidence of seasoned artists. "Officer Chen," the chief called out, the State Police Academy called again. "They want to make the Art Angel initiative part of their standard training curriculum. They're talking about a whole new approach to community policing, based on what we've started here." Rob smiled, but his eyes were on the children. "That's wonderful news, Chief, but the real experts are right here. Everything I've learned about connecting with the community, I learned from them." As the official visitors toured the ward, David overheard snippets of conversation about funding expansions, training programs, and research studies on the impact of art therapy in law enforcement. What had begun as a moment of confrontation in the town square had grown into a movement. Later, as the winter sun began to set, Rob and David stood by the window, watching snowflakes dance in the growing darkness. The ward behind them hummed with activity as children and officers added finishing touches to their showcase pieces. "Sometimes I wonder," Rob mused, "if Katie somehow knew this would happen. She always said that art has a way of bringing truth to the surface. That Sunday in the square, when my truth came spilling out, it was like she had orchestrated the whole thing." David thought about the divine timing of that confrontation, the photo that fell at just the right moment, the words that needed to be said and heard. "I believe Katie's love created ripples that are still moving through our community. And now you're creating your own ripples, touching lives in ways she never could have imagined." A child's voice called out from across the ward, "Officer Rob. Can you help me make this butterfly look more like it's protecting people?" Rob smiled, straightening his badge before heading back to his young artist. "That's the thing about butterflies," he said over his shoulder. "They don't just transform themselves, they transform everything they touch." David watched as the officer who had once tried to silence his ministry now taught a child about gentle brushstrokes and brave hearts. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with a single moment of grace. The night of the Blue Christmas art showcase arrived with a magical combination of gently falling snow and twinkling lights. The children's hospital ward had been transformed into an art gallery, with portable display walls creating a professional atmosphere while maintaining accessibility for patients who couldn't leave their beds. News crews from 3 local stations had set up their equipment, their presence testament to how far the Art Angel initiative had come from its humble beginnings in a moment of confrontation. The mayor stood chatting with Chief Patterson near a stunning wall of butterfly-themed artwork, while representatives from police departments across the state mingled with hospital staff and families. Rob Chen stood in his dress uniform before Katie's original butterfly painting, now framed in hand-carved wood created by one of the teenage participants in the program. Pastor David approached, noting how the officer's posture had changed over the months, still proud and professional, but now carrying a gentle strength rather than rigid authority. "Ready for your speech?" David asked, straightening his own tie. The organizing committee had asked them both to share the story of how the initiative began. "I've been practicing with the kids," Rob replied with a smile. "They said I needed to speak from the heart, just like I paint. Though honestly, I'm more nervous about this than I've ever been on patrol." The ward filled quickly with guests, including several state legislators and a representative from the governor's office. But the true VIPs were the children themselves, dressed in their best clothes, proudly stationed near their artwork to explain their pieces to visitors. Amy, now strong enough to walk short distances, wore a dress decorated with hand-painted butterflies. She had been chosen to open the showcase, and as she stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent. "Welcome to Blue Christmas," she began, her voice clear and confident. "Some people think that means being sad, but we know better. Blue is the color of police officers who protect us. Blue is the color of the sky where butterflies fly. And blue is the color of hope when it's wearing a badge." The audience chuckled appreciatively, and Amy continued. "A few months ago, Officer Rob came to our ward because he was sad about his sister, our art angel. But something amazing happened. Instead of letting sadness win, he helped us create something new. Now we have lots of art angels in police uniforms." Rob wiped his eyes discreetly as Amy introduced him to the podium. Taking a deep breath, he surveyed the room filled with faces both familiar and new. "6 months ago, I stood in the town square, angry at the world and everyone in it," he began. "I confronted a street preacher because I thought I was doing my job. Instead, I found my calling." He gestured to the artwork surrounding them. "My sister Katie believed that art could heal any wound, bridge any gap. I didn't understand that until the day my grief spilled out in front of Pastor David's preaching stand." The cameras rolled as Rob shared the story of that Sunday morning, of the photograph that changed everything, of the transformation that followed. Law enforcement often talks about community policing, but we sometimes forget what community really means. It means seeing each person as an artist of their own life story. It means approaching each situation with a blank canvas instead of preconceived notions. He walked over to a wall displaying before and after photographs. "These pictures show the same locations in our town, 6 months apart. The first set shows graffiti we used to call vandalism. The second shows community murals created by those same young artists, working alongside our officers." The next speaker was Tyler, the former vandal turned program mentor. He stood tall in a crisp button-down shirt, his previous defiance transformed into purposeful confidence. "Before the Art Angel initiative, I thought police officers were just out to get us," he admitted. "Now I understand they're here to help us get ourselves. Officer Chen taught me that every blank wall is an opportunity to create something beautiful, and every mistake is a chance to paint something new." As the presentations continued, David watched the faces in the crowd. Hardened police veterans wiped away tears as children explained their artwork. City officials who had initially been skeptical now nodded in understanding as they saw the program's impact firsthand. A surprise came when Chief Patterson took the podium. "Today, I'm proud to announce that the State Police Academy has officially adopted the Art Angel initiative as part of its core training curriculum. Starting next year, every new officer in our state will learn these principles of creative community engagement." The announcement drew enthusiastic applause, but the evening's most powerful moment was still to come. Rob returned to the podium, this time accompanied by several officers from his department, each carrying a covered canvas. "When Katie was teaching art in this ward, she had a dream," Rob explained. "She wanted to create a series of paintings showing how hope looks through different eyes. She never got to finish that project, but today, we'd like to show you how her dream has grown." The officers unveiled their canvases one by one. Each painting showed a different scene from their daily work, but transformed through the lens of hope and creativity. A traffic stop became a chance for connection. A patrol car's flashing lights cast butterfly-shaped reflections. A handshake between officer and citizen created ripples of color through a neighborhood. "These paintings will hang in police stations across our state," Rob announced. "They'll remind every officer that our true duty isn't just to enforce the law, but to protect the colors in each person's life story." As the formal presentations concluded and guests moved through the gallery, David overheard countless conversations about implementing similar programs in other communities. The Art Angel initiative had become more than a local success story, it was becoming a movement. Near Katie's butterfly painting, a small group of children had gathered around Rob. One of them, a new patient who had arrived at the hospital that week, looked up at him with curious eyes. "Is it true you used to be a scary police officer?" the child asked innocently. Rob knelt down to the child's level, his face gentle. "I wasn't scary, I was scared. Sometimes when people are hurting inside, they forget how to show kindness outside. But then something amazing happened. I learned that every person, even a tough police officer, has an artist's heart waiting to be discovered." The child considered this thoughtfully. "Can you teach me to paint brave things like your sister did?" "Of course," Rob replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Katie always said that bravery isn't about not being scared, it's about creating something beautiful despite being scared." As the evening drew to a close, snow continued to fall outside the hospital windows, each flake catching the light like tiny stars. David stood with Rob by Katie's painting, both men reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "You know what amazes me most?" Rob said quietly. "That Sunday morning, I thought I was going to shut down some troublemaker. Instead, God used that moment to open up something beautiful. Every time I put on this uniform now, I remember that my job isn't just to protect and serve, it's to help people find the colors in their own stories." David smiled, watching as the last guests admired the artwork, took photos, and made plans to spread the initiative's message. "Katie once told me that butterflies remind us that the most beautiful transformations often start with a moment of breaking open. I think she'd be amazed to see how many lives have been transformed by your moment of breaking open in the town square." Outside, the police car's blue lights painted the falling snow in gentle waves of color, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single act of understanding, and that even the coldest winter can hold the promise of butterflies yet to come. 1 year to the day after that fateful Sunday morning in the town square, Pastor David stood at his familiar wooden stand. The autumn air carried the same crispness, the same scent of fallen leaves and possibility. But everything else had changed. The small gathering that once attended his Sunday sermons had grown into a diverse congregation that spilled onto the surrounding sidewalks. Today was special, not just because it marked the anniversary of the Art Angel initiative, but because of the dedication ceremony about to take place. Where there had once been empty space beside David's preaching stand, a permanent installation now stood covered in a blue cloth. The mayor, Chief Patterson, and various dignitaries sat in chairs arranged nearby, while news cameras captured the historic moment. But the most important attendees were scattered throughout the crowd: the children from the hospital ward, their families, and the police officers who had become part of their extended family. Rob Chen, now a sergeant due to his revolutionary community outreach work, stepped up to the podium. His uniform gleamed in the autumn sunlight, but it was his warm smile that commanded attention. "1 year ago, I stood in this exact spot with anger in my heart and grief clouding my judgment," he began. "I was looking for someone to blame for the pain of losing my sister Katie. Instead, I found a purpose that would honor her memory in ways I never imagined." He gestured to the crowd, where Amy sat beaming in her wheelchair, now decorated with intricate butterfly designs created by her fellow patients. Next to her, Tyler stood tall in his community college art program jacket, his arm around his younger brother who had recently joined the youth art mentorship program. The Art Angel initiative has now been adopted by police departments in 27 states, Rob continued. Over 5,000 officers have received training in creative community engagement. Juvenile crime rates have dropped by an average of 45% in participating communities. But numbers don't tell the real story. He paused, looking at the covered installation. The real story is in the relationships we've built. It's in the trust we've earned. It's in the lives that have been transformed, including my own. Pastor David stepped forward to join Rob at the podium. Together, they had been asked to unveil the installation that would serve as a permanent reminder of their unlikely partnership. "Before we reveal this memorial," David addressed the crowd, "I want to share something Katie once told me during one of our Wednesday hospital visits. She said, sometimes God sends angels disguised as adversaries, just to remind us that love speaks in unexpected voices." At a signal from the mayor, Rob and David grasped the blue cloth. As they pulled it away, gasps of appreciation rose from the crowd. The installation was a stunning piece of public art, a towering butterfly crafted from thousands of smaller elements. As people moved closer, they could see that each piece was unique. "Every component of this sculpture tells a story," Rob explained, his voice thick with emotion. "The wings are made from melted-down badges donated by officers who've completed the Art Angel training. The body is constructed from art supplies used by our hospital patients. And if you look closely at the base..." People leaned in to see that the butterfly's foundation was built from hundreds of small paintings, photographs, and letters, testimonials from lives touched by the initiative. In the center, protected behind crystal-clear polymer, was the original photograph that had fallen from David's bag that Sunday morning. "But there's more," Rob continued. "This installation is more than a memorial. Thanks to a grant from the State Arts Council, it's also the first of 12 Art Angel creation stations being installed across our city. Each one will be stocked with art supplies and staffed by trained officers and community volunteers. Anyone seeking hope, healing, or a fresh start can come here to create." Chief Patterson took the podium next, holding up a sleek tablet. "I'm proud to announce that as of this morning, the Art Angel initiative has been officially recognized by the Department of Justice as a model program for community policing. The training manual that Sergeant Chen developed, Painting New Possibilities, Creative Approaches to Law Enforcement, will be distributed to police academies nationwide." The crowd erupted in applause, but Rob's attention was drawn to a small commotion near the back. A young mother was trying to quiet her crying toddler while juggling shopping bags. Without hesitation, he left the podium and made his way through the crowd. Those watching saw him help with her bags, then kneel down to show the child how to make finger-painted butterflies on a piece of paper he pulled from his pocket. David smiled, remembering the angry officer who had confronted him a year ago. That small interaction said more about the initiative's success than any official recognition could. The ceremony continued with testimonials from program participants. Tyler spoke about how art had given him a new direction in life. Amy shared how the police officer's regular visits had helped her find courage during her treatments. Other officers described how the initiative had changed their approach to community policing. As the formal proceedings concluded, people began to explore the creation station. Children showed officers their artwork while parents shared stories with social workers and community leaders. The barrier between law enforcement and community had dissolved into a canvas of shared experience. Rob returned to stand beside David, watching the scene unfold. "You know what Katie would love most about this?" he asked quietly. "What's that?" "That it's not finished. Every person who comes here will add their own colors to the story. The butterfly keeps growing, keeps changing." A young girl approached them, holding up a painting she'd just completed at the creation station. "Officer Rob, look. I painted hope." Rob knelt down to examine her artwork, a swirl of colors that somehow captured the very essence of possibility. "It's beautiful," he said. "Can you tell me about it?" "See, the blue is for the brave police officers," she explained seriously. "The yellow is for Pastor David's happy sermons. And all the butterflies are for Miss Katie, watching from heaven and smiling because her brother learned to paint with his heart." David watched as Rob hugged the child, neither of them caring that her still wet painting left colorful smudges on his uniform. In that moment, he understood that their story had become something larger than either of them. It had become a testament to the power of divine timing and human transformation. As the autumn day drew to a close, the creation station glowed with internal lighting, casting butterfly-shaped shadows across the town square. People lingered, reluctant to leave the atmosphere of hope and possibility that filled the air. Rob and David stood together at the wooden preaching stand where their story had begun. "You know," Rob said, "that Sunday morning, I thought I was coming to shut down a problem. Instead, God shut down my anger and opened up a whole new world." David smiled, watching as an elderly couple helped their grandchild add a painted handprint to the community art wall. "Katie once told me that butterflies are God's way of proving that something beautiful is always about to happen. I think she was right." The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, as if heaven itself was creating art. The butterfly sculpture caught the light, sending rainbow reflections dancing across the square. Below it, a simple plaque read, "The Art Angel Initiative. Where Hope Takes Flight. In loving memory of Katie Chen, who taught us that every heart is an artist. And every moment holds the possibility of transformation." As darkness fell, the last visitors reluctantly began to leave. But the creation station remained lit, a beacon of hope in the growing night. Tomorrow, new artists would come, some wearing badges, some seeking healing, some simply looking for connection. And in every color they added, in every story they shared, the miracle that began with a confrontation in the town square would continue to spread its wings, touching lives and transforming communities, one brushstroke at a time.